Hey everyone, I'm Liz and welcome to the Milk and Honey YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your very own Ruffle makeup bag. This bag, it's perfect for gifting or for selling at markets or just treating yourself. I like to box the corners with French seams instead of using binding or other methods, and I find it gives the pouch a lot of structure and it's really easy to achieve. And it's also a great sewing skill to learn and to practice. The finished sizes for the three pouches are the small, which is 5 by 3.5, the medium, which is 7 by 4.5, and the large, which is 9 by 5.5. The one I'm making in this video is going to be the medium size, and if these look familiar, that's because the dimensions are exactly the same as my original Boxy Pouch pattern. This whole idea actually came about from a different project that I was working on that had ruffles that didn't quite turn out how I wanted. So I decided to sew a pouch as a palette cleanser, and just for fun, I added a ruffle to see what it would look like. The first version I made of this, I folded the ruffle in half, but it made it really hard to sew a top stitch beside the zipper. So I decided to try one that was with a double fold hem, just a single layer, and that was a lot easier to do that top stitch with. I tested both the dual tone and also a single tone version of the pouch, and I love how both of these versions came out, but my heart is with the two-toned, especially the gingham. Super cute. Really like how it came out. For fabrics, I recommend using quilting cotton, linen, or a lightweight canvas for the body. For the ruffle, it will work best if you use a lighter fabric like quilting cotton, so it gathers really nicely and that top stitch is going to be a lot easier to achieve. For zippers, you can use either a number 3 or a number 5 zipper. I'm going to use a number 3, and just to show you the difference here, the small and medium versions have the number 3 zipper pulls and zipper tape, and for the large I used a number 5 just to give you guys an idea of what the difference would be using the different types of zipper. Now pattern wise, this one's going to be a little different from my usual setup. If you prefer to follow along with a written copy, you can get the pattern from my shop, which is linked below. There will be a full version if you don't already have the original Boxy Pouch pattern, and there will also be an extension version if you do own the original, since the only change here is going to be the dimensions for the ruffle and adding it to the pouch. Now the ruffle can be added to the small, medium, and large sizes, but not the mini. I tried and it's just too tight to get that fabric ruffle to look nice. So if you're ready to sew your own, I'll have the cutting instructions listed in the description for the medium size. And all my other sizes, again, will be available on my site. Let's get started. From color 1, you're going to need to cut 2 A pieces, which measure 12 inches by 9.5 inches. And if you are using directional fabric, make sure that it is running along the 9.5 inch side. You'll also need to cut out 2 B pieces, which measure 2.5 inches by 3 inches, and these are going to be the zipper tabs. For color 2, you're going to need to cut 2 C pieces, which measure 12 by 9.5 inches. And again, if you're using directional fabric, make sure that the pattern is running along the short edge, the 9.5 inch side. You'll also need to cut out 2 E pieces, which measure 24 by 2.5 inches. I decided to go with a contrasting print because I really like how the gingham fabric looks on this project, but you can use fabric from color 1 or color 2, which is your lining, whatever you prefer and whatever you think would look the best. From your fusible fleece or your batting, you're going to need to cut 2 pieces, which measure 12 by 9.5 inches. You'll also need one number 3 zipper that measures 12 inches in usable length. And what that means is if you're using a closed end zipper or one with a little piece of metal on the end, you want to make sure that it is at least 9 inches from the end of the tab to the other end of the zipper. Now, if your zipper is shorter than the recommended size, I can show you kind of a cheat to make it just a smidge longer. And if you want, you don't have to use a number 3 zipper. In my samples here, in my small, this is what the number 3 zipper looks like. And for my large, I used a number 5 zipper. So just to give you a little bit of comparison, what those would look like in the project. Now that we have all of our pieces ready, we can start with our first sewing step. So first we're going to take our A pieces and our D pieces, and we're going to place them so that the wrong side of piece A is facing the glue side of our fusible fleece. We'll take this to our iron and we will fuse them together using the manufacturer's directions. Now, if you're using quilt batting, you can just skip the fusing step, obviously, and you can go right into quilting your pieces. And quilting is optional if you're using fusible fleece. I've decided that I'm not going to quilt these ones, but it is entirely up to you. This is a great project to practice your quilting and different quilting designs. So next we're going to take one of our E pieces. I already went ahead and pre-ironed mine. So what you're going to do is place it so the wrong side of the fabric is facing up, and you're going to fold one of the long edges in 1/4 inch and you're going to press it with your iron. And you're going to fold it over one more time to encase that raw edge. Again, you're going to put it in about 1/4 inch. And you're going to give it a good press. And I like to use some pins or quilting clips to keep this from flipping open while I sew. And I like to do 2 sets of stitches near the edge. I usually do one about 1/4 inch away from the fold, and then another one 1/8 inch away. So we're going to repeat these steps of ironing and stitching on both of our E pieces. So now that we have hemmed the bottom part of our ruffle, we can add our basting stitches to create the ruffle effect. So to do that, you're going to go to your machine and you're going to increase your stitch length to the biggest it can go to, which is usually either a 4.5 or a 5 stitch length. And a little hack that I saw that I like to do for my ruffles now is I'll take it to the machine like this, and I'll start with a long tail of thread, maybe about 6 to 7 inches long of thread to start. I'll put my needle down and sew straight 1/4 inch from the edge. And then when I get to the bottom here, I pivot, I'll do 1 stitch down, and then I'll sew back the other way about 1/4 inch from that stitch. So what that looks like, I went ahead and did it on this piece. I'm hoping you can see it because I use different color thread, but I have my nice long thread tails here, and I went down all the way to the end here and I pivoted. So what this is going to do now is you don't have to worry about your ruffle coming undone at the other end. You don't have to worry about tying threads together. I think this is a super smart way to be effective when you're making ruffles. So to make your ruffle, what you'll do is flip over to the back side, and you want to grab the 2 bobbin threads, and these are the ones you're going to want to hold on to. So hold on to these threads, and very gently you're going to pull your fabric down, and it will create this ruffle. So be very gentle when you're doing this. You don't want to yank your fabric because you can fray the edge here. Some people actually go over this edge with a zigzag stitch before gathering to help prevent that. But most of the time, if you're just careful and you're doing the 2 sets of stitches, you should be fine. So the final length that we're gonna want our ruffle to be is going to be the top edge or the longer edge of our fused A piece. So because we're making the medium, that will be 12 inches. So that is what we want the final size of our ruffle to be. So we'll repeat this ruffling process on our other strip to create 2 ruffles. So now we're going to attach the ruffle to our exterior piece, and I just pulled out my quilting clips because I know we're going to need them for this step. So we're going to take our exterior piece that we fused together and one of our ruffles. And you can see mine's not quite evenly distributed yet because I like to do that final distributing when I'm pinning my ruffle on. So first you're gonna locate the top edge. If you're using directional fabric, this is really important. Now with my flower pattern, this is the top edge of my piece. This is our fused A piece. So I'm gonna first line up the short edge with the top and side here, just like that. And I'll pop another one here. And I'll just continue to go across, pinning in my ruffle. And if you noticed, I'm not pinning the fabric with the right sides together. I'm actually putting the wrong side of the ruffle facing the right side of the fabric. And that's because it's not being turned inside out. This is what the final ruffle is going to look like. Just pull that apart there, and I'm just gonna keep ruffling. Some people I know like to mark the center of their ruffle and then mark it with the center of the fabric A piece, the backing piece. I'm not as particular with how my ruffle comes out. I think ruffles are cute when they're a little chaotic. So that isn't something I'm doing for this project, but if that's something that you like the look of, definitely try it out. Just keep messing with it. There we go. I think I have a little bit more to play with, so I'll just make it a little tighter here because I can always let it out. Yeah, okay, I'll let it out a little bit. And now that we're at the end, again, I'm gonna line it up with the corner of the fabric at the top. Just try and ruffle it nice and close to the edge. And I'll pin it on the top and on the side. So now we're gonna take it to our sewing machine and we're gonna use a 1.8 or a 2 stitch length. And we're gonna start at the side and we're going to sew down to about here. We're gonna pivot and then sew across the ruffle, pivot again, and do a little back stitch, sew across here. And we're going to repeat this process of attaching our remaining ruffle E piece onto our fused A piece. So now that it's attached, what we want to do is take out our set of basting stitches because you will be able to see these if you don't take them out. So now's the time we are going to do that. The easiest way that I've kind of figured out how to do this is the side that we were pulling on, where the threads are, I just turn the fabric inside out and I use a seam ripper just to help me, and I pull at the thread so that the end of it comes through the opposite side where the wrong side of the fabric is. So when I push it back out, now the thread is on the inside, and on the opposite side where we sewed across, I just rip the thread on this side. Make sure I got the thread and not the fabric. And on the inside, I just cut the bobbin thread too. And then I go back to this side where the long thread is, and all I do is pull the bobbin thread across just like that. See? Now it's gone. Same with the other one. Boop, gone. And now on the front, it won't be attached to anything, so it'll just pull right out. Super satisfying. So if you want, you can just go ahead and trim any loose threads if you want to, but you definitely don't have to. Just grab this one. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to move to attaching our zipper onto our pouch. Now I mentioned before, if your zipper isn't quite long enough, I was going to show you guys a kind of hack that you can make it longer. I know I got a few comments about that as well in my previous video. So here I have a closed-ended zipper, and from edge to edge, it measures 8 inches, but of actual usable zipper space, it's about 7 inches. So I'm gonna show you guys a way that you can increase the usability of this zipper, and that's with using scrap pieces of fabric. So I went ahead and cut some strips. These are about 3 inches long, and they're the same width as my zipper tape. So what I'm gonna do is place them so oh, it's a little bit, oh no, it's good, it's good. Psyching myself out here. So what we're gonna do is place the right sides facing the zipper tape. And I'm kind of just judging where the closed end of this zipper is. So I'm gonna want my stitch to be 1/4 of an inch from the edge of this piece of fabric. So I'm gonna do that on this side. And just like that, I have attached the extra fabric here. So you're going to flip it open so the pretty fabric is facing out. And you'll do the same thing on the other side. Now, because we can't pull the pull off all the way, what I like to do is take a pin or some quilting clips just to keep the two edges together. And again, like before, I personally don't like to see the little piece of metal on my piece of zipper tape when it's in my final project. So I'm gonna place the piece of fabric pretty close to the end of the zipper. So when I sew over, you won't see the metal. And then again, just placing the fabric right side together and then sew it across. And there, I'll just take my clip out. And if you want, you can trim the excess pieces of fabric and zipper tape. And you can sew a top stitch on either side. I didn't do the neatest job here. But now you can see we have more usable space on our zipper. So what we could do is evenly cut off either side so that the total usable space in this case would be 9 inches, which would work on the small pouch. So this is an option for you if you want to extend the usability of your zipper. Now going back to our project here and our zipper, we're going to attach it to our project. And I like to do it in 2 stages. I find it's a little bit neater to attach the zipper tape onto the exterior before adding the lining. So that's what I like to do. And I face my zipper teeth side down along the top edge, and I clip it in place. And then I will sew it either using a basting stitch, or I'll do a smaller stitch like a 2 length. And we'll sew across the edge here using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or you can even use your zipper foot. So next we're gonna take one of our C pieces, and with the right side facing down, we're gonna align the long edges, and then we're gonna sew directly across where we just sewed the zipper down. And if you prefer, you can do this step and the previous step at once. I just prefer to separate it just so everything is nice and straight and I don't sew anything on crooked. So we'll sew across to attach this side of the, so we'll sew across to attach our lining piece. Then we're going to open and iron the seam and repeat this process on the other side of the zipper tape as well. So after your zipper is attached, it should be looking something like this. So on the side where the zipper teeth are and the pull, you should have both of your exterior pieces with the ruffle attached. And on the back, both of your lining pieces should be attached as well. You're just going to want to make sure that the fabric is ironed nice and flat away from your zipper. Then you'll take it to your machine. and you'll sew a top stitch on either side of the zipper. And this is to keep the ruffle down and also to keep the lining from coming out and getting stuck in your zipper when you open and close it. And for this stitch, I like to use a 2.5 stitch length or larger. Now we're gonna move on to making the tabs on the pouch. So we're gonna take our B piece of fabric, which is the 2.5 by 3 piece. And I went ahead and pre-ironed mine just to make this part a little quicker. What you're gonna do is fold it with the wrong sides facing each other and the 2.5 inch edge lined up. And you're gonna iron it to crease the center. Then you'll open it back up and bring in those two shorter edges into the center to meet with that crease, and you'll iron both sides and then bring them in together to enclose the raw edges. You'll take it to your machine and sew some top stitches on either side. I like to keep it about a 1/8 of an inch to a scant 1/4 of an inch away from the edge on both sides, and you'll repeat this on your other B piece. So after those are sewn together, what I like to do is just take the two short raw edges, place them right sides together, and then I sew a couple stitches close to the edge just to make this tab stay in place. So now we're gonna grab the rest of our project, along with our quilting clips, and we're going to place it on either side of our zipper ends. And you're gonna wanna place, if there's a side you like a little bit more, you're gonna wanna place the side you like facing the zipper, because that's the side you're going to see once it's sewn. And you'll just wanna center the tab with the zipper. And then you're gonna wanna sew pretty close to the edge, about an 1/8 of an inch away or a scant 1/4 of an inch, to attach the zipper tabs to the bag. So now that it's attached, we can begin assembling our bag together. Now I'm gonna show you guys how to do this without using a hole in your lining. So if you do want to turn it out using your lining, remember to keep a hole at the bottom. So we're gonna start with taking our exterior pieces and lining up the bottom edge. And it's the side that the zipper is not attached to. And we're going to flip it over to the lining and do the same thing on the lining. Just line up the bottom edge and put a clip on both sides. And we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch away on either side. So now you should be left with a piece that looks like 2 tubes. And I went ahead and just pressed my seams open on both sides. So now we're gonna take some clips, and we wanna line up this bottom seam with the zipper. So we can see our zipper teeth right here. I'm gonna line up the seam of just the exterior. I'm gonna put a clip in here, and then I'm gonna flip it over and do the same with the lining. Line up the seam on the bottom with the center of the tape, and I'll just include the lining with that clip there. And then I'll just line up the rest of the fabric on the left and right side. Just like so. And clip it in place. And we'll repeat this on the other side here, lining up the lining and the exterior with the center of the zipper. Sometimes I like to put 2 clips in, one on either side of the zipper. Just, whoops, oh no. That happens a lot. I got cheap clips. Okay, there we go. So now we're gonna take this to our sewing machine, and we're going to sew all the way across on both sides using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when you're going over this center part here, make sure you're sewing a little bit slower, just because there's a lot of layers you're going through: the zipper tabs, and both pieces of fabric, so it's quite thick. So now that we have sewn down our sides, we're going to measure and mark our boxed corners. Again, we're making the medium, so we are going to measure 1 3/4 of an inch. And the measurement is going to be from the fold and the sewn seam. So 1 3/4. Just like that. Again, 1 3/4. Great. Now we're going to cut out our corners. And this is the part where you gotta be careful you're not cutting too deep. And these are my all-time favorite fabric scissors. They're the Tech Pro. Fantastic. 10 out of 10. Perfect. Move those out of the way. We're going to take this back to the machine one more time before we flip it, and we're going to make some reinforcement stitches along the edges that we cut so it doesn't unravel when we turn it inside out. All right, so we just made those extra stitches on the edges here. And here's the fun part. So we didn't leave a hole in the lining like we did with the last boxy pouch video. We're going to use the hole here. So very carefully, you're going to turn the pouch inside out. And this is why I say if you're a beginner, you might not want to start with this method just because it is quite tight. I've been doing this for a while. I still rip my fabric sometimes. I did that recently in a video. So just be careful. And just like that, we are to the exterior. Perfect. So we're going to open up our zipper. We're going to make our fabric nice and flat on the inside and the outside. And we're going to grab some clips. And we're going to use French seams to box our corners. So with French seams, first you sew it on the outside of your fabric, then you trim and then turn it to the lining and then sew your final stitches on the inside. So that's why we want the exterior to be out first. So we're going to just line up our fabric like so and just clip it in place. We'll pull it apart and we want the seam here to be pointing down. And you want to make sure that you're catching your lining fabric when you sew across. So just make sure that it is parallel with the exterior. You'll pin your 4 corners just like so. Oh, that one's gonna snap. Sometimes you can tell with your quilting clips that they're not as strong as they used to be. Perfect. So we'll take this to our sewing machine. We're going to sew 1/4 inch away on all 4 of the sides, and I like to use a 1.8 stitch length. Our next step is going to be trimming down our seam allowance, and very carefully, I'm going to take our scissors and trim it down about halfway so it's about 1/8 of an inch from the sewn seam. And finally this side. So we're gonna take our bag and we're gonna turn it so the lining is on the outside, and we wanna get these corners poked out as well as we can. Get nice and sharp. And what I like to do is just roll the fabric between my fingers, try to get as much of that seam allowance on the other side hidden away. And then I put a couple clips in again and repeat this on the other 3 corners. So it's nice and tight to the seam. And I am so happy that so many of you like this method of finishing the bag, because personally I hate binding and I am a quilter, so it's kind of hard to get around the not binding thing. So whenever I'm doing a project that isn't a quilt, I try to avoid it because I really don't like it. If you guys have any binding hacks that I should check out, please link them below, because honestly, you will save a lot of quilts from going in the later pile. Okay. So now that these are all clipped, again, we're just gonna go to our machine and sew a 1/4 inch away from the edge to secure these in place. So after it's sewn, it should be looking something like this. And our last step is just gonna be turning the pouch inside out. And we're gonna poke all of our corners. And if you see any stray threads while you're doing this, just take your scissors and give it a little snip. Perfect. Okay. And there you have it. You have your very own ruffle zipper pouch, perfect for makeup or for toiletries or for just looking cute. Thanks so much for joining me for today's tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did making it. If you have any questions on today's project or have an idea for a future project, please leave it in the comments below. I love looking at your comments and also photos of the projects you create. Until next time, happy sewing, everyone!